a man against logic, a ring lost in the heart of Africa, and a strategy that seemed suicidal until it turned into one of the greatest victories in boxing history. It was 1974. The entire world turned its eyes to an African country that, until then, had rarely made global headlines. Zaire. There, in the sweltering heat of Kinshasa, a battle that transcended sport would take place. Muhammad Ali, already considered a legend by many, would face the undefeated and feared champion George Foreman, a man who knocked down opponents like paper dolls. Foreman was the embodiment of raw power, of overwhelming strength, while Ali carried the weight of something greater, proving that intelligence, strategy, and courage could overcome the seemingly impossible. The streets were bustling, not only with the African sun, but with the clamor of a people who had adopted Ali as their hero. The cry, Ali, Boma, the Ali, kill him, in Lingala echoed like a war chant. The former champion, considered finished by many experts, was there to reclaim his crown, not just the crown of heavyweight champion, but that of a symbol of resilience, of a man who defied all odds. By then, Ali no longer possessed the same speed he'd enjoyed in his early years. His legs weren't flying like they once did, and his career had been marked by falls, defeats, and even a suspension for refusing to fight in Vietnam. But what the world didn't know was that he carried an invisible weapon, built not of muscle, but of mind and heart. He prepared a silent strike, not with his fists, but with patience, a strategy so risky it could end in tragedy, or eternity. The fight that would become known as the Rumble in the Jungle wouldn't just be a title fight, it would be a psychological war, a test of human endurance, and a spectacle that would change boxing forever. And, as with every great saga, this story doesn't end in the Kinshasa ring. It paves the way for another brutal battle, fought in the heat of the Philippines, against Joe Frazier, in what would become the epic conclusion to a legendary trilogy. Ali stepped off the plane in Kinshasa into a suffocating heat that seemed to crush his body like an extra weight on his shoulders. It wasn't just the African climate that enveloped him, but also the feeling of entering unknown territory, a ring without ropes, where politics, culture, and hope intermingled. Upon stepping onto Zairean soil, Ali encountered neither coldness nor distance. He found a people who welcomed him as if he were a lost son returning home. Thousands of voices shouted in unison, Ali, Boma, the Ali, Boma, the Ali, kill him. With each echo, with each pulse of that phrase, the former champion felt that his mission went beyond regaining his belt. He was now the spokesman for a nation, seeking dignity and recognition. George Foreman also landed, but his reception was frosty. The people didn't connect with him. To them, Foreman was the American monster, the oppressor, the merciless machine that crushed without mercy. Ali, with his sharp tongue and courage, represented rebellion, the voice of those who refused to kneel before the powerful. This difference became clear from the first few days. Ali walked the streets, talked to people, ate his food, smiled at children. Foreman, isolated, surrounded by security, seemed a stranger in a land that embraced only one hero. The nights in Kinshasa became part of Ali's invisible preparation. He would leave the hotel and hear the drums resonating in the darkness, men and women chanting his name, transforming his fight into a collective cause. It was more than boxing, it was identity, it was African pride. It was a chance to show the world that the strength of a people could not be ignored. Ali knew how to use this to his advantage. You are my energy, you make me invincible, he repeated in interviews, but he also whispered it to himself, like a survival mantra. Meanwhile, journalists eyed Ali with suspicion. Many considered him finished, a man in decline heading for a humiliating defeat. Foreman, young, undefeated, and brutal, was the overwhelming favorite. It was almost unthinkable to imagine anyone could withstand his devastating barrage of punches. Yet Ali smiled, provoked, and crafted phrases that fired up the crowd and disconcerted his opponent. He knew the fight was on long before the first bell. It was psychological warfare, and Ali was a master at this. That first week, a journalist asked Ali, "Do you really believe you can beat George Foreman?" The champion stared straight into the camera and firmly replied, "I don't just believe, I've already beaten him here," and he beat his chest. This almost arrogant confidence wasn't just to convince others, it was to convince himself, to sustain his own flame in the face of the impossible. But what no one knew was that, silently, Ali was beginning to devise a strategy that would change boxing forever. He wouldn't have the strength to trade open blows with Foreman. He knew that if he tried to beat him with speed, his legs wouldn't last the 15 rounds. So, in the back of his mind, a risky idea began to emerge. An idea that sounded like madness, like suicide. But for Ali it was the only way to turn weakness into victory. And it was in this mix of heat, music, faith, and risk that what the world would come to know as rope-a-dope was born. A strategy so bold it seemed insane, but it would become Muhammad Ali's secret weapon. The days leading up to the fight were a spectacle in themselves. While Foreman trained in silence, surrounded by security and away from the crowd, Muhammad Ali made a point of turning every training session into a show. He ran through the streets of Kinshasa, surrounded by hundreds of children chanting his name, raising his arms and taunting, "Foreman is slow, Foreman will fall." Every phrase, every gesture, was calculated to undermine the giant before he even stepped into the ring. Ali knew his greatest weapon lay not in his muscles but in his mind. In training, the difference was stark. Foreman hit the heavy bag so hard the sound echoed like thunder. Each blow seemed to herald destruction. Journalists described his punches as explosions, capable of dismantling anyone. Ali, on the other hand, seemingly less intense, surprised everyone. He spent long minutes leaning against the ropes, letting his sparring partners unleash combinations against his body and arms. From the outside it looked careless, like laziness, but Ali was, in fact, shaping his body and endurance to withstand what was to come. Thus was born the rope-a-dopeling against the ropes, absorbing blows, letting your opponent expend their energy until only exhaustion remained. Too many. It seemed madness. Who in their right mind would stand against George Foreman's punches? But Ali believed in something greater, that patience, combined with intelligence, could transform weakness into victory. Foreman didn't understand. He saw Ali smiling, taunting, laughing at every threat. The young champion was irritated, feeling disrespected. "I'll finish you in the first round," he said at a press conference. Ali, not missing a beat, replied, "If you think you can, try. I'm the greatest. You'll learn that when you're out of breath and out of strength." The audience erupted in applause. Foreman, inside, was beginning to fill with rage, and Ali knew that anger was the enemy of strategy. Behind the scenes, his coaches were divided. Many feared the idea would be a disaster. "Ali, you'll kill yourself against the ropes, against this monster," warned Angelo Dundee. But Ali, steadfast, replied, "He's human. Every man gets tired. When he does, I'll be here." It was an almost religious belief, a faith that only he seemed to hold. And so Zaire became an invisible battlefield. There he trained not only the body, but also the mind. Foreman trained only for destruction. While one accumulated strength, the other accumulated the energy of an entire people who treated him as a chosen warrior. In the silence of the African nights, surrounded by drums and the cries of Ali Boma, the conviction was born that the impossible could be defeated. Ali already had a plan, but the question that echoed in everyone's hearts was, could he withstand a storm of punches from a man who had never known the word defeat? If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and comment below about what you would do in Ali's shoes. Your interaction helps this story reach more people and keep this epic boxing memory alive. That it was dawn in Kinshasa, but the Zaire Stadium throbbed as if it were noon. More than 60,000 people packed the stands. The heat was stifling, and the humidity seemed to cling to the body like a second skin. When Muhammad Ali entered the ring, the deafening cry took over: "Ali, Boma the Ali, Boma the Ali, Boma the Ali, Boma," the chorus of faith and resistance. George Foreman, with a serious and intimidating expression, walked toward the center like a predator, carrying on his shoulders the aura of invincibility. He was the champion, the monster who had brutally destroyed Joe Frazier and Ken Norton. For the experts, this would not be a fight, but an execution. The bell rang. Round 1. Foreman advanced like a tank. His fists flew at Ali with the force of hammers, trying to finish quickly, as he always did. But Ali surprised him. Instead of running away, he pressed himself against the ropes. He took punches to the body, arms, and stomach. Each blow made the crowd hold their breath. But Ali talked, taunted, smiled. "Is that all, George? You don't hit as hard as they say," he shouted between punches. With each word, Foreman's fury grew. The following rounds followed the same pattern. Foreman attacked relentlessly, striking with his entire body weight. The ring shook, Ali's arms absorbed the impact, and everyone's eyes saw the impossible, a man allowing himself to be caught. But therein lay the genius of rope-a-dope. While Foreman burned energy, Ali conserved it. His breathing was calm, his mind cool, and when he saw an opening he would fire swift jabs at his opponent's face. These weren't strikes to knock out, but to wound pride. to remind Foreman that he wasn't facing a punching bag. In the fourth round, a commentator described what seemed unbelievable. Foreman was already showing signs of fatigue. The monster who had knocked everyone out in minutes was now breathing heavily and sweating profusely. There, even under punishment, he smiled, mocked, and uttered phrases that cut like knives. "You're tiring, champ. I feel it, I see it." Foreman, enraged, responded with more punches, but they were slower and less accurate. The crowd went wild. The stadium vibrated like a volcano. The African people understood what was happening even before the commentators did. They saw that Ollie wasn't being destroyed, but rather building his victory blow by blow, silence by silence. Every round was a psychological battle. Every swinging rope was part of the trap. Foreman, without realizing it, was being swallowed by his own power. In the sixth round, Ollie whispered in Foreman's ear, as he landed another devastating blow, "George, is that all you've got?" The giant gasped, lost, unable to understand how the man was still standing. The audience, entranced, continued to chant Ali Boma. The fight was no longer just boxing. It was resistance against oppression, mind against brute force, the impossible being written before the eyes of the world. And so, the stage was set. Foreman was exhausted. Ollie was completely consumed with energy, waiting just for the exact moment to unleash the final blow that would change the history of the sport forever. The whole world watched in disbelief. How much longer would Ollie endure? And, even more so, was he truly ready to take down the seemingly indestructible giant? The air was as heavy as lead when the bell sounded, and Foreman came in slow but still dangerous. Ali leaned back against the ropes, arms high, torso loose, eyes cold. "Come on, George," he murmured. The champion threw heavy crosses, which grazed the gloves and crashed into Ollie's body like waves crashing against a wall. With each impact, the crowd responded in unison. Ali Boma. That Foreman tried to close in, but his feet sank into the damp ring, and his chest rose too quickly. Ollie felt the rhythm change, like someone listening to a song slowing down. He returned, a clean jab, then another, and Foreman's head shook. Ollie spoke again, barely opening his lips. "Tired, champ." Foreman gritted his teeth, responded with a wide swing, and found only air. Ali slid half a step, let the blow pass, rested the back of his head against the rope, and smiled briefly. Time seemed to compress. Each second weighed like stone. Ollie lifted his chin, looked into the hurricane, and waited for the final mistake. He saw it. Foreman opened his guard for a moment, and Ollie attacked like a loose spring. A jab sliced through the air and found the champion's face. Another jab knocked him back a step. Ali rolled his shoulder, held his breath, and fired a right overhand shot, clean, crisp, like a bolt of lightning. Foreman's head shook, his body hunched, his legs searching for the ground. Ollie didn't rush for the final blow. He measured, breathed, landed two more jabs, a short hook to the temple, and another right that silenced the night. The giant fell. In slow motion, the stadium exploded. Ollie Boma. That now sounded like endless thunder. Foreman tried to get up, hands on the mat, eyes lost, but his body wouldn't obey. The referee counted. 1, 2, 3. Ali watched like someone watching a dream take shape. 4, 5, 6. Foreman swayed, raised a knee, and collapsed again. 7, 8. The bell didn't save him. 9, 10. End. Ollie raised his arms, smiled at the Kinshasa sky, and felt the entire ring breathe with him. The night vibrated. Kinshasa became the sea. People cried, danced, hugged strangers. In the center, Ali walked lightly, as if his body had become lighter after the storm. He pressed his gloves to his head, winked at the cameras, and said softly, almost to himself, I told you he would tire." A reporter stuck the microphone between the ropes. "Ollie, how did you stay standing?" He smiled unhurriedly. "Head, heart, and ropes. You let the ocean beat until it turns to foam." The phrase spread through the stadium like wildfire. Foreman, sitting in the corner, breathed heavily, staring into space with wounded dignity. Ollie approached, touched his shoulder, and said, "You are great, George. Today I was greater." It wasn't humiliation, it was respect. It was a cycle closing before the world. The drums started again outside, and the chant Boma that took on new meaning. It wasn't a call for death. It was a celebration of life. Logic turned on its head. Victory came not from the hardest blow, but from the weight that dismantles giants. Zaire pulsed, light. The belt returned to Ali's hands, but what glittered that dawn went beyond gold. What he reclaimed was an ancient promise, that courage can have method, and that intelligence can overcome strength when the world doubts. In the locker room, Sitting in silence for a minute, he closed his eyes and still heard the distant chorus. Ali Boma, the quiz. It was as if the voices were pushing air through his lungs. Angelo hugged him. The team laughed and cried at the same time. And Ollie, now without gloves, played the strings as if thanking an old friend. But there was no definitive rest. One last mountain loomed on the horizon, Joe Frazier. The trilogy still demanded a final chapter, a reckoning that promised warmth, pain, and truth. Ali knew Kinshasa had tested his mind. Manila would demand his soul. He stood, straightened his robe, and whispered to the mirror a simple vow, almost a prayer. I will go as far as my body says no. And when the light dawns in the Philippines, I will not retreat one step. Word. After the thunder, silence. The stadium still shook when Ollie stepped down from the ring, carrying on his shoulders not only the belt, but the faith of someone who had endured the night in Kinshasa. He walked through the hot corridors, feeling the sweat dry like salt on his skin, and each step seemed to say that the impossible can be tamed when the heart doesn't negotiate. The victory wasn't a miraculous blow. It was method. It was waiting. It was a cool head in the face of the storm. In the locker room, the sound of drums drifted through the windows like an ancient breath. Foreman sat, dignified, and received from Ali the touch that separates rivals from enemies. Respect. The night taught that courage isn't a hurricane. It's a tide that persists until the rock gives way, and Kinshasa etched this lesson in the iron of time. Reporters surrounded the champion and heard a truth. Head and patience also knock out. The marks on his arms showed the price of the plan, but his eyes shone. Kinshasa danced, and in the mirror Ollie thanked the ropes. Nothing. It was luck. It was a choice. Ollie understood that victory doesn't end with a bell. It continues in the bodies that return home knowing they can endure. Rope-a-dope wasn't magic. It was emotional mathematics, conserving energy, reading one's breath, talking to one's own pain until it becomes an ally. Every second on the ropes taught that patience isn't passivity. It's invisible action. You advance. When you choose to wait, you strike when you decide not to rush. In the ring and in life, there are nights that only yield to those who breathe deeply. Kinshasa proved this. Ollie left bruised. Yes, but he emerged stronger, because he showed that strategy also has a pulse. And when he lifted the belt, he held up a mirror to the world. Sometimes the strength that saves us lies in controlling the rhythm, in the silence between strikes, in the courage to say no to impulse. This is the science of the improbable, transforming limits into paths and fear into directions. In the end, greatness is more than knocking down. It's about building respect. The people sang until dawn. Ollie taught the world to breathe. But the story didn't end in Kinshasa. Destiny pointed to Manila, in the Philippines, where Joe Frazier awaited the last dance. If Zaire tested Ollie's mind, Manila would take its toll. On his soul, it would be suffocating heat, breathless rounds, two men pushing their bodies to the limit of back and forth. Ollie knew there would be no ropes to teach patience. There would be shadows, pain, and a simple truth: sometimes winning is enduring until the other can no longer see. The path was already set. Between African drums and the Philippine sun, the lesson remained. Strategy without courage is a map without a road. Courage without strategy is a road without a map. The victory in Kinshasa showed that the impossible yields to those who choose the rhythm. In Manila, the trilogy would determine whether the heart could keep beating. And for us, outside the ring, the creed remains. When life pushes you to the ropes, breathe, listen to the time, and remember that all strength begins with a decision not to give up. At the next bend, Manila will raise its spirits. The price, sweat, and truth.